Thank you, John. Short article from Dr. Carl Sagan, very short. The pale blue dot, which should be coming up soon. A vision of the human future in space. And I don't see it's coming up.
Come on, can I scoot with it?
We'll start. In a moment, you will look at that dot. They're still looking for it. Those are the slides for our speaker. Okay, you would have seen a little blue dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. The picture was taken by NASA from millions of miles away, and they turned the camera around. Instead of looking at the sun and other things, they would look back at this pale blue dot. That was us. We're not going to see that. It's disappeared. On it, everyone that you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, and this next one wasn't because of a recent election, every corrupt politician, that's Carl's words, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust, and it's a little blue dot, in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, says Carl, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Thank you.
And now, Karina Black.
Good afternoon. I'm speaking on behalf of two organizations, the Society of Ontario Freethinkers, which exists here in Waterloo, and the student group Waterloo Atheists and Secular Humanists, which is comprised of University of Waterloo students. I'll be speaking about secular humanism as it relates to end-of-life decisions, and my perspective in particular is drawn equally from that humanist worldview and my own experience as a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed on January 5th, 2015 with melanoma that turned out to be stage 3. So I've been through the surgery and chemotherapy, and I've thought about this issue for myself. And that's the perspective I bring to you today. I'll begin by explaining what humanists believe in particular. I'll give you some context for Canada's history with assisted death, and then I'll share a humanist response to others who are making these decisions. Next slide. Yep, that one. I represent the only non-religious philosophy here today. We are atheists, meaning we do not believe in the supernatural in any way. We are agnostics, meaning we don't assume that we know for sure whether or not there is a God, but we live as if there is none, and we do quite well without. And where many theists would look to the supernatural for explanations about the universe, humanism consciously rejects spiritual and religious claims. Instead, we rely on empirical evidence and scientific research to give us the best possible answers where they exist. Where the research does not exist, then maybe the answers don't either, and that's okay. Next slide. The International Humanist and Ethical Union describes it this way. Humanism is a democratic and ethical life stance which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. It stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethic based on human and other natural values, in the spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. It is not theistic, and it does not hold supernatural views of reality. At the core of modern humanism are these two statements. We live one life, and we leave one legacy. With that in mind, we strive to live according to common values: ethics, compassion, dignity, reason, and social and economic justice. The focus on our life here and now is a consequence of one fact: death is final. Now, this can seem bleak to someone who believes in an afterlife or an afterbirth. But the good news for us is that while we're still alive, we have all the opportunity in the world to focus on the things that matter to us. I believe that there are two things that we can influence while we are still alive: what we leave behind, and to an extent our own circumstances, where we live, how we live, what we think, how we think, the state of our health. This is where end-of-life decisions become important, because as well as the many conversations that must take place before those decisions can be made. But to have those conversations at all, we have to face the reality of death. We live in a death-denying culture. Embracing grief and the process of dying is not something our society connects with. Confronting and accepting death are outsourced to hospitals that prevent death as long as possible, and even in hospice care, families can end up shouting at each other at the patient's bedside, arguing about whether the patient should try further treatment for the condition or whether it's time to let go. In my interview with a grief counselor at Hope Spring Cancer Support Center, she said that this actually does happen, where the families will be shouting at each other over the patient as the patient is dying without actually talking to the patient themselves. These are the symptoms of a death-denying culture: a lack of conversation about the patient's wishes, a lack of respect for those wishes when the patient is suffering, fear of death, denial, a feeling of isolation, and loss of control. Now, this reaction to death can impact healthcare decisions as well as emotional states, and we can see that in the data. There's a persistent belief that everything possible must be done to avoid the death of a patient. This has been changing, but it's still there. I've seen it myself. As an example, in 2009, Medicare in the United States paid $50 billion just for doctor and hospital bills in the last 2 months of patients' lives. That's more than the annual budget of the Department of Education. And for comparison to their larger budget, Medicare paid $88 billion for the last year of a patient's life. So the vast majority of that spending per month just increases towards the end of life, and it seems to be more and more futile the farther you go. And I don't mean to say that people who are in palliative care, elderly, who are dying, are not worth treatment. What I do mean to say is that through investing massive amounts of resources in late-stage interventions, by consequence, the patient's quality of life may suffer even more, especially if the interventions are unable to relieve them from their conditions, such as chronic pain, paralysis, or the inability to breathe without assistance. And yet doctors are often unwilling to rush the process of death, in favor of prolonging life wherever possible, or to look at it differently, they consequently prefer to prolong the process of dying and the suffering that goes along with it. In situations where there seems to be no relief from suffering, many patients and family members may wonder if there's any point to it at all. A 2010 study reports that people who are terminally ill identify their top priorities as avoiding suffering, being with family, having the touch of others, being mentally aware, and not being a burden to others. As the process of dying has become increasingly medicalized, a paradigm shift is needed in order to reintroduce compassion and empathy into the healthcare system, so that these priorities are properly recognized. At the heart of humanism is the concept of human agency, the idea that every person has the capacity to make their own choices. Additionally, human beings do not give up the right to their agency because of the state of their health. This means, for example, that families do not get to override the wishes of a person who knows what they want. They have to respect the person's decision to do what is best for them. And in humanism, there is no duty to live or obligation to listen to an outside authority. Agency means that each person must decide for themselves which choices they can make with a clean conscience. But Canadian law sometimes conflicts with human agency. For example, consider a person with ALS, a neurological disease. Symptoms can progress quickly from loss of mobility, loss of speech, and eventually loss of the ability to breathe because the nerves that control the muscles are dying. The average lifespan after diagnosis is 2 to 5 years. Modern medicine can keep the patient alive for longer, with medicines to keep them breathing and put food in their stomach, but the paralysis and inability to communicate are irreversible. Death usually comes from respiratory failure. If you were diagnosed today with such a fatal disease, knowing that your body would fail while your mind remains alert until your death, what would you do? What would you want your options to be? Next slide. These are the questions that Sue Rodriguez asked after she was diagnosed with ALS at the age of 41. She was given 2 years to live. When she asked doctors about her options, one of them recommended hospice care, which would do nothing to relieve her symptoms. And another doctor said that legally there was nothing he could do. Sue didn't want to die completely dependent on machines and other people. But suicide was a remote possibility because she rapidly lost the use of her hands because of her disease, and swallowing pills became very difficult. She enlisted the help of the Right to Die Society of Canada. To them, it was unfair that an able-bodied person might legally attempt to end their life, but a severely disabled person could not get assistance to do the same. This is clearly a violation of Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. A legal argument for overturning the law on assisted suicide was taken to the Supreme Court of BC, where it was rejected. Upon appeal, it was rejected again, and after it was taken to the Supreme Court of Canada, it was rejected by a vote of 5 to 4 for the third time. The deciding vote was due to Justice Opinka's strong personal views on the sanctity of life, and by the sanctity of life, I mean the loss of control over one's own life, not the fact that life has value. And the deciding vote was not because the court denied the charter violation. Sue passed away with an anonymous doctor's assistance in 1995 with a friend present. Under existing laws, the doctor could have been charged with murder. Fast forward to 2016, and the situation is dramatically different. Thanks to the hard work of many advocates and to high-profile cases like Sue's, last year the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that Canadian adults have the right to end their life with a doctor's help. The court's ruling stated that for those who have no hope of relief for severe physical health problems, who may be condemned to a life of severe and intolerable suffering by the existing ban on assisted dying, said the court, a person facing this prospect has 2 options. She can take her own life prematurely, often by violent or dangerous means, or she can suffer until she dies from natural causes. The choice is cruel. Next slide. Bill C-14, which passed into law more than a year later, is a compromise. Some of the people who made assisted death a public issue would still not be eligible for assistance after the bill was passed with a restrictive amendment. Many Canadians still disagree with the Supreme Court ruling itself. The 110 hospitals affiliated with the Catholic Health Alliance of Canada have objected, raising the question of the religious affiliation in the first place. A doctor is protected by their conscience, both in general and under Bill C-14. What about an entire hospital? Does an institution have a religion? We are lucky in Kitchener-Waterloo to have, next page, we're lucky to have Grand River Hospital as well as St. Mary's, but some communities only have access to a Catholic hospital and will be denied their charter rights if that hospital refused to perform the full range of legal procedures. As always, death is a difficult public issue, and our elected officials continue to seek a balance between what they view as too permissive and too restrictive. You can view the full text of Bill C-14 online at the link above. So what is a humanist to do? My advice would be to do what anyone should do on an individual level. Take some time right now to think about what you want at the end of your life. Talk to close friends, family, or someone else that you trust. Involve your healthcare team in these conversations as well, as the grief counselor I talked to emphasized. It's useful to write a living will or written instructions for what you want done for you. And some people even organize their own memorial services. I had a friend pass away from breast cancer in August, and nobody thought she could do it, but she did write her own eulogy. And I think it was a wonderful gift to her family. A humanist believes that our legacy, our stories, actions, and influence on other people is the most precious thing we can leave behind after we die. Take care of the end of your life now, and you can live the rest of it more fully. For humanists whose friend or family member is passing away, remember the importance of human agency and treat your loved ones' wishes with the respect they deserve. Advocate for them as well, because not everyone respects the will of the patient. And on a broader scale, I would say that compassion motivates the humanist community to engage in activism that supports our charter rights in full, since assisted death is still not available to those who are suffering intolerably from a condition that does not shorten their natural life. This means continuing to apply pressure on our government until C-14 is amended to properly reflect our common values, which happen to be humanist values too: dignity, respect, equality, and compassion. Thank you.
Everybody's got many opinions, and I think we have to give everybody a fair chance, and this is the procedure that we already have. So thank you very much. So what I would like to ask maybe a question for everybody to answer. In my opening comments, I referenced to some frail and elderly people I'd spoken to when I was when through the activities of providing meals for these people. And the question often was, Jan, I'm old and frail, I lived a good life, they keep on giving me this pill, I just wish they wouldn't try to keep me alive, keep me living. So for each of you, what would based on your faith, what would be the summary of your comments you'd make to answer that question to that person? If you maybe take just 2 minutes, and then we'll end on that question. We'll start maybe from the end of the table again, and all come down. Karina?
I would say it very much depends on the circumstances. I don't really think like an elderly person, because I'm not yet. Hopefully not yet. And but what I see is that if you've grown old, if you've retired, then you may feel like there's nothing left for you to do, or maybe that you're not wanted. I'm not sure. What were the circumstances of the person in question?
So I just maybe repeat the question. So this person is elderly, she's frail, right? She's led a good life, and her mental faculties are with her, but she's really said, why do you keep on giving this pill to prolong my life? And what counsel, based on your faith, how do you, they give her a pill, whatever else, so she can live a little bit longer. And so really the question is how do you, based on your faith, how do you respond to her question?
So
why are you doing this for?
Prolong life, not end life.
End of life.
Oh, choose not. All right.
So based on a humanistic
I really
approach.
think it depends on the underlying reason.
Okay.
Because if she's feeling unwanted by a society that's really moved on, then there are ways around that. There are groups she can get involved in. Maybe she can find activities and socialization that can make her happy and make her feel like there is meaning in her life right now. If that was the problem. If the problem is that she's very afraid of not having control over her own life, if she's to fall and break a hip, then maybe she needs to start thinking about more assisted care. But in any case, I would say that I wouldn't rule out choosing an earlier death for a person, just because it's a very individual decision. It's a serious decision, and all I can do is trust that the person making that decision has, fully realizes how serious it is and still chooses to make their decision. Now, I'm more inclined to advocate for assisted death in cases of extreme pain, extreme discomfort, especially physical, but I'm still learning about mental health as well and mental health issues. So I really can't comment on her particular case because I don't know her. I know she's just an example, but it would really depend on what she could live with, or what she could live with deciding to do.
Okay. Thank you very much for those thoughts. For Karina Black, she's here. The question is a little bit different. Do you think modern medicine has gone too far? And how would that respond to your end-of-life decisions?
Is this on? Okay, it is. By modern medicine, you can mean a lot of things, depending on which part of the world you're talking about. For instance, there's the transhumanist movement, largely more affluent white people in the United States, I think. And there are some communities in Europe as well where they're really looking at transhumanist ideals, which means to go beyond what is human, to go beyond the natural limits of our bodies. And that is a case where I would say that the combination of medicine and technology has gone too far. And the reason I say that is that the rest of the world is still trying to catch up. So I would argue that in cases where the purpose seems to be to press the boundaries of what's possible, I would encourage the people pressing the boundaries to look back and help those who are still struggling with basic needs. And what we do now as conventional medicine may have been considered going too far a century ago. So our standards will change over time, but our main concern, instead of specifically what's going too far, needs to be on helping everyone else catch up to a good standard of health.
Okay, thank you very much.